This is a complete program for releasing and stretching the deep front line. For this program, you will definitely need a soft ball and a lacrosse ball. The golf ball is optional, and you will also need a yoga block, which will become important later. So if you're aware of myofascial work, what we'll be doing is we are going to be breaking down and hydrating the tissues in each section of the deep front line. As you can see right here, it runs all the way from our big toe up to and above the jaw. So we're going to work through the major components of these structures, starting with the foot. I'm using a golf ball because that works better for me. Each one of these releases we will be doing for 2 or 1 minute, depending on how really vital they are. Each foot is going to be a minute, and you're going to be able to follow along with me throughout this entire video, so that way you don't have to time yourself. You don't need to do any of that. You'll see when I start, that's when you start. The key with the foot is that you are looking for any kind of a hot spot on the bottom of the foot. If you don't have a golf ball, the lacrosse ball works just fine. The key is I want to focus on the space between my big toe and my heel, and I want to get really deep into that tissue as I'm rolling through it. I'm slowly, very slowly moving from the upper part of my heel all the way up to my big toe and the ball of my foot around the big toe, and then I'm slowly working my way back. That is because this is the first section of the deep front line. It's primarily the big toe. If you have flat arches, this is a really important area for you to work on. If you've ever had plantar fasciitis, this is a really important area for you to work on. And if you, for any reason, have foot, ankle, knee, hip, or back pain, this is a really important area for you to work on. Every single release and stretch that we are going to do in this program is really important. So your goal is to stay inside your frame of tolerance, meaning that the discomfort is not so extreme that you're tightening up other parts of your body or changing your breathing or wincing or grunting. Our goal is to release tension from the body, and creating tension in another place while you're trying to release tension on the body is not helpful. As you can see right there, I just switched feet, so you can switch feet, and we're going to work the other foot now. Understand that as we're doing this, our goal is between 1 and 2 minutes, because that's how we get in and hydrate these tissues. Fascia is remarkable stuff, and it responds to pressure because it is packed full of nervous system receptors that it responds to. And it has this ability from going like fibrous-y and hard to being more gel-like and fluid. It does not have a singular state. It can transmute its state. So what we are trying to do is hydrate these deep tissues so that when we go to stretch them, they actually can release. If we try to stretch them first, it doesn't work as well. The myofascial component, the self-massage component, is kind of like chewing gum. You've got to chew gum before it becomes stretchy. Well, what we're going to do is focus on all the muscles that are accessible to us in the deep front line, and we're going to make sure those have got really good hydration and massage before we try to open them up with stretch. So now that we're done with the golf ball, we're going to move on to the soft ball. And we're going to work on the calf. Now, we're not working on the two heads of the calf. We're actually working on a deep muscle that runs behind the gastroc and the soleus, something much deeper. So you're going to notice that I'm actually focusing on about halfway down my shin and lower, because I'm trying to get between the other two calf muscles to this deep muscle that's right up against the bone. And as you can see, once I find a hot spot that feels like I've got something to release or hydrate, I am just going to slowly point and pull my toes back and forth, very gently, very slowly, not quickly and aggressively. Now, as you've probably noticed, if it's really intense, you can take your leg off of the other leg. I only cross my legs like this to add pressure so I can get into those really deep areas. So now we're going to go ahead and switch sides. Now, the key here is you probably noticed that, I'm moving around a little bit each time, and that's because as a spot releases, I move on to another spot. The other thing I want to focus on is making sure that I'm keeping my torso well aligned, that I'm not slouching, and that I'm also working on really even, deep breathing. Like I said, I'm keeping track of the time, so all you have to do is follow along, pay attention to your body, and focus on your breath. Now that we've finished up with the calves, we're going to go into the adductors, but particularly we're going to go into the high adductors, which one is called pectineus and the other one's called adductor brevis. That's not really that important right now. If we get into those really high structures, that's going to facilitate the most release above that area. But Magnus, that is still a really, really important adductor and longus, but when we get to the stretching component, you're going to see that those were most likely at least semi-hydrated and released, and when we get to stretching, they will open up. So as you can see, I've got the ball buried pretty deep inside my hip here. I'm gonna open up my arm so you can actually see where the ball is located. But right now the ball is stacked on top of the yoga block, and I've got it right about an inch down from my hip crease. My other leg in the back is straight, and I'm working really hard at focusing on my breathing and keeping my back nice and straight. It's also good if you can put your arms in a 90-degree straight line like this. The reason my head's hanging is because I'm looking at where the ball is. So when you're not trying to figure out where the ball is, make sure you're keeping your head in a neutral position. But this 90-degree position at the arm is to promote neutral shoulder position. We spend so much time internally rotated that there's no need to do that when we're trying to correct posture. You'll see I'll do it on and off, but I'm trying to correct it as much as I can, and you will too. But you can see where the ball is here. It's really deep inside my hip. Now, as you can see, I've got the softball on top of the yoga block. I'm going to aim for that inner spot, and I'm going to put as much weight onto that as I can while still trying to keep the rest of my body mostly neutral. Just breathe even and make sure that you're staying inside your frame of tolerance. So now we're going to take the softball and we're going to aim for the TFL kind of upper quadricep area, which is right on the outer 45-degree aspect of the quad. Now, as you can see, I'm laying on that area that I showed you with my hand with this softball, and I'm looking for any kind of a hot spot. You'll notice that my body's rotated, I'd say about 30-45 degrees. I'm mostly holding myself up on one shoulder, and you're going to keep working on this area. I just wanted to point out that this 45-degree angle is really important, and we're going to work in a line up and down there. It comes off the bony process of the hip, the pelvis. So if you feel with your hand kind of right about where your pocket is, and you feel like there's a little bony protrusion there, you're going to try to basically line up with that and roll halfway down the thigh in that line, really focusing on that 45-degree angle. Again, I'm just really trying to point out the position, which is right about where my pocket is, off that bony protrusion of my pelvis, on that upper half. I'm just going to try to get the ball right in there, just like so. So next we're going to move up to the hip flexors. So I'm going to find that bony part of my pelvis. I'm going to go in 2 inches and down 2 inches. You can see right here, this is my belly button. You can see it's about right between and below that bony part of my hip, sorry, that bony part of my pelvis and where my belly button is. And I'm just going to try to find, remember that this is kind of inside the pelvic bowl and deep in the abdomen. So I'm just looking around for wherever the hot spot is, and when I find it, I'm actually going to lay as flat as I possibly can, looking the direction away from where the ball is and toward my knee that's up at 90 degrees. And I'm just going to focus on deep diaphragm breathing. The psoas is often called kind of like the emotional indicator. It plays a huge role in hip flexion, but it also is the muscle that we often inhibit when we are stressed. We want to curl up defensively in kind of the fetal position when we're stressed, but as humans, we're capable of inhibiting that to a degree. But what we don't inhibit is the tension that we hold in that area. So if you're under a lot of stress, you will notice that your psoas will tighten up. This often leads to back pain or hip pain. And so getting into this deep core muscle is really key. It gets overblamed. It is part of the deep front line. The truth is, though, is if the whole deep front line is tight, the psoas is never going to be able to release and stay released. So we have to work all of the surface aspects of the line that we can access to try to get our body back into postural order. So now we're going to take the softball and we're going to focus on the upper abs just below the rib cage. We're not going to go down the middle line. So anything that's in line with the sternum or the belly button is a no-no. We're going to work on the outer aspects of just below the rib. Don't be on your rib. You will bruise it. So you want to be just below the rib. And the key here is breath. So I'm going to lean into this spot. It's going to feel pretty intense. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly but surely try to lower myself down to where I can completely allow myself to lay as flat as possible on these tissues just below the lowest ribs. And I'm going to focus on deep, deep diaphragm breathing. Again, I have the opposite knee kicked up so that I can roll at an angle onto the ball. I am slowly working my way down here. You'll see over time that I will get flatter and flatter, but this is pretty, it's a pretty intense sensation. So you'll really have to breathe into it. You can see I'm getting lower and lower on my support elbow there. And my other arm is getting further and further away until I'm laying pretty much flat on it. So now we're going to trade in the softball for the lacrosse ball. And we're going to start by trying to release some of the glutes or the deep rotators under the glutes. And so there's a lot of ways we can do this. We're going to put the ball on the ground. We're going to pick a hip. And You can start in a crab walking position. You can start in this kind of frog position, leaning on one elbow. Again, this is more that 45-degree angle that I really am getting deep in there. And you'll notice that there's going to be moments where I move my knee up and down. This is kind of the crab walking position. And then this is what I call a figure four. This is the deepest way that you can get in there if this hits your area. It's different from person to person. I personally really enjoy sitting in this frog position and moving the knee slowly. This is also good. All of these different positions I'm demonstrating here are good. Everything that gets a thumbs up is good. Also good. So whatever works for you, whatever's comfortable, well, let me rephrase that. Whatever's effective for you and within your frame of tolerance. I understand that none of this is comfortable, but I once heard it said that pain is discomfort with the intention to withdraw. So the key here is to use your breath and your relaxation and your awareness to actually lean into the discomfort and try to relieve it instead of tensing up your entire body with the intention to withdraw. And that is the difference, as far as this is concerned, between discomfort and pain. So now we're going to focus on the lower back. This is my spine. If I go out from my spine like 2 to 3 inches, you'll notice there's a little divot, bump, groove. It's kind of where the QL meets the posterior oblique. That's the quadratus lumborum meets the posterior oblique. And those are what most of us call our lower back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look around in there for a hot spot. And when I find it, I'm going to tuck my pelvis into a neutral position. I'm going to cross my ankle over my knee. I'm going to take my opposite hand and I'm going to support my floating hip. So the ball now is on my left lower back with my left ankle crossed over my right knee and my right hand is supporting my right hip so I'm not twisting. And I'm just going to breathe and allow that to start releasing. I do find that as it starts releasing, it is best to actually rotate the arm into the palm up position and just breathe evenly and gently into the diaphragm. So now we're going to move on to the stretching portion, which we're going to use our yoga block for. First, we're going to be stretching the calves because we always start from the bottom up. So I'm going to put the ball of my foot on the yoga block. I am going to straighten my back knee, flex my back glute, make sure my hips are square, make sure that my big toe is pointed forward, if not slightly internally rotated. And I'm going to focus on trying to drive my heel back and down while keeping my glute flexed, my chest upright, and my head posture should be fairly upright. You'll notice that I'm looking at my hips and my back and everything. Right now, I just want to focus on driving the heel back and down, keeping the knee locked, keeping the hips square, and keeping the rear glute activated. So this stretch I call the wall sphinx. The idea here is I want to start with my knees as close to the wall as I comfortably can. I'm going to place my pelvis flat on the ground. I need to make sure that I've always got my pelvis flat on the ground. I'm going to put my elbows directly underneath my shoulders. I'm going to generate pressure down through my palms, and I am going to try to raise my sternum and look up. Not directly ahead, but like 45 degrees up. And I'm going to allow my feet to fall away from my body. Now I want to keep my knees in line with my hips as much as possible. And as I do this, you're going to feel some really intense sensations through your abdomen. That is because this pulls on a lot of your hip flexors and your adductors and your abductors. There's a lot going on in kind of the pelvic floor deep front line system. And this particular stretch starts to address the symmetry of those things by giving you a flat ground to lay your pelvis on. And then you can arch to start loosening some of the tissues around the diaphragm, the deep hip flexors, and this external rotation is going to help with some AB and adductors and some of those hip flexors, as well as addressing some of the rotators in your hips. This is a really important stretch for some people, and for others this might be very easy. But you really want to focus on staying in this position for the full 2 minutes, staying inside your frame of tolerance, and breathing deeply into your abdomen and allowing your feet to fall outward in a gentle manner. Nothing about this stretch should feel forceful, but everything about this stretch should feel like you can tell where all the little differences are on each side, because they'll become very apparent, especially if you focus on deep, deep diaphragm breaths. So now we're going to focus on stretching the adductors, which are a huge part of the deep front line with the frog stretch. You'll notice that when I choose to do this, I'm putting my legs at 90 degrees with my toes pointed outward and my heels as close to the ground as possible. And I'm trying to keep my back neutral by keeping my pelvis tucked and then slowly pushing backward. If you cannot hold this position with your feet and lower leg below the knee, that's okay. You're allowed to be on the top of your foot with your feet pointed backwards as well. And over time, you can try to graduate to this version of the stretch, but there's nothing wrong with that. The key here is to try to push the hips back and down, keeping the pelvis in a neutral position. Again, breathing evenly and deeply into the diaphragm and trying to allow this tension in the inner thighs, adductors, or what some people call the groin. We want all of that to melt away over time. Now we're going to move over to a wall and we're going to try to stretch our piriformis and also probably some glute. This is called a figure 4 stretch. I prefer to do it on the wall. I pick my hips up by pushing into the wall, cross ankle over knee, and from here I just lay as relaxed as possible, making sure that both hips are level and flat on the ground. I'm going to stay here for the full time and breathe evenly, allowing my hip to release. You're going to feel this on the back side of the hip, most likely, kind of in the glute region. Now we're going to do a basic child's pose, which is where your knees can be close together or wide on this. That's entirely up to you. You're going to lay back and down with your hips stacked on top of your heels, your knees bent, your knees apart in whatever configuration feels comfortable without creating a pinching sensation in the front of the hip. And I'm just going to let my arms lay above me. If having your arms above you is uncomfortable, you can lay them palm up in the direction of your feet. That's also acceptable. If this is too deep and you want to put a yoga block under your forehead or just stack your forehead on top of the back of your palms, that will also work. Those are all reasonable modifications. Now we're going to go ahead and open up the whole deep front line by putting the soles of our feet together, allowing your knees to point outward. You're going to tuck your hips underneath you so that your lower back is flat on the ground. And you're going to find some sort of configuration that allows you to lay your arms above you to let your chest open up. Now, if any part of this is uncomfortable and you're not able to keep your lower back flat on the ground, you can put yoga blocks or pillows under your knees to make it more comfortable. And the same thing with your arms. You should not feel like this is a strain or a struggle. This should be very relaxing, and you should be focusing heavily on diaphragm breathing. Now the very last thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our knuckles of our fingers and we're going to massage the muscles on each side of our jaw. They are actually part of the deep front line. So we're going to massage these with these knuckles, just making like subtle, gentle circles. And we're going to go forward and backward, changing direction regularly, and just hunting around in there and working on releasing as much tension from the jaw as we can. Great job getting through this today. The very last thing that we're going to do when we stand up is just tuck our hips in, try to get really good thoracic extension, and just study our own posture and see how we feel.